There's a simple model of how children read. It says that 1, if kids can recognize print words, and 2, understand the words they're recognizing, then they can comprehend what they're reading. That first part, recognizing printed words, relies on a process called decoding. Decoding makes it possible for kids to translate written letters and words by matching a letter or string of letters to its corresponding sound. So how does a child decode? Once they see printed letters and words, that information travels up to the visual cortex, which is in the very back part of the brain. From there, it bounces around to specialized areas of the brain to be interpreted. Studies of the brain tell us that reading, along with most other language functions, happen in the left side of the brain. But there's evidence that kids, at first, haven't achieved quite that level of left side specialization for reading as adults. Not yet anyway. That comes with experience. While we don't understand everything about how a child learns to read, we do know some things based on brain imaging studies. At first, kids recognize letters based on their visual features, and they use both sides of their brain early on. The fusiform gyrus, which is in our temporal lobe on the side of our brain, is really important for letter recognition and decoding, and its role evolves as a child grows to eventually be able to process whole words just by sight. In the early stages of reading development, work by Linnea Airy describes kids as moving from the pre-alphabetic stage, where they can't read at all, to the partial alphabetic stage, where they start to understand that printed words mean something. As kids begin to understand the alphabetic principle, that is, that graphic symbols like letters can represent the sounds that make up our language, the left side of the brain's activity becomes more stable, and the right side's activity decreases. And along with recognizing letters as important symbols for sounds, a child's ability to focus on and manipulate those sounds in spoken words becomes really important. This skill is called phonemic awareness. A phoneme is another word for a sound, and it makes it possible for kids to build words up and break them down from and into their individual sounds. It's very important for decoding. Enter the left superior temporal sulcus of the brain. This area specializes pretty early on in the reading process, and it's particularly important at this stage because it's associated with phonemic awareness. As kids get more and more experience with letters and sounds, they move into the fully alphabetic stage. This is when decoding finally gets its day. Now, another area of the brain, the left inferior frontal gyrus, is really coming into its own. This area gets recruited when children need to take single sound units and blend them together to get longer sequences, and then apply meaning to those sequences of sounds. A child in this stage might come across a word, and even though they've never seen that word before, because they know the sounds that each letter represents, they can think about those sounds, blend them together, and come to a pretty good pronunciation of that word. That is letter decoding. And then all it takes is coming across that word several more times for children to be able to commit the whole word into their memory, so they don't need to blend each of the individual letters and sounds together anymore. When a child can recognize a whole word by sight, it also lights up the other features of that word in their mind, like the role that word usually plays in sentences, or the word's meaning. This is the tipping point for reading comprehension. If kids can automatically identify whole words by sight, they suddenly don't have to use all of their mental resources to decode a word. Instead, they get to spend those resources on other things, like understanding the magical story they're reading. Stay tuned for part 2 of this video series, which explores what happens when decoding breaks down.
Created using PowToon.